For those of you who don't know me, I will try to be quick about this. I am working on my third master's degree. I have a Master of Library Science, a Master of Arts in Visual Development, and I am working on my Master of Fine Arts for game dev, specifically for concept art. And I have been a concept artist. I've been inactive for a while, but for the Morrowind team for Beyond Skyrim. I wanted to specifically mention my degrees not because I want any of you to think you have to have them, but because you'll see that it's library science and art. And this is important because there is a step that everybody skips when they are doing, honestly, most art, and that is research. And you do not need to be a librarian to do good research, but it helps to know one. And now you all know one. So I'm just getting right into it. What is a prompt? Because this is prompt, project, and process. So a prompt is just, you may have it called an assignment, it may be called a claim, it may be a project, just whatever word gets used. They are all collectively the term that is being used to describe an artistic problem that we as concept artists have to solve. We are visual problem solvers, as one of my professors likes to say. And I think that is honestly the best description of concept artists that I've ever heard. Like, obviously, if you say concept artist to some generic nobody on the street who's not familiar with anything artistic, they're probably going to be like, oh, what is that? At which point you can explain, oh, I take the ideas that other people or yourself have and I help bring them to life. Which sounds very cool and very noble, but at the end of the day, what we use to do that is visual problem solving skills. What does that mean? That means that you are given a task, and you as an artist now have to work through that idea and... Sorry, I finished this PowerPoint at 4 o'clock this morning, so I am seeing typos. Yeah, it's your job as an artist to take what's an idea, just this abstract thought, and bring it into a concrete concept. And sometimes that is a really straightforward task. The example that I gave is we need a shield made out of glass. You can start ideating with shields that already exist. You can do studies and sketches of tower shields, kite shields, bucklers, heaters, whatever. And you do not need to know any of that off the top of your head. That is where the research thing comes in that I mentioned. Literally just Google, hey, types of shield. If you don't know, now you can. Once you have the ideation stuff sort of set up, the kind of baseline for where you're going to start, you start iterating. And that can be just starting with coming up with interesting silhouettes, having fun shapes, and then as you go on, you can sort of iterate with different material options. So like for this one, glass, you could have a stained glass shield, you could have a fulgurite shield, you can have like any texture, you could have like bulletproof glass shield if you wanted. It just depends on what the prompt you've been given calls for. And ideally, you'll get some guidance there. But sometimes, not only do you not get guidance, but you also have to really think through the idea you've been given. So this example is a weapon made out of crystallized starlight. I was going to whip one up, but I did not have time. So, you're not given a specific type of weapon. The most material thing you have about it is crystallized, and you have to figure out how to make starlight look solid. Or not. But, you have to figure out how to confront that challenge. And I mentioned specifically here that it is up to us to ask questions and not always of our art directors, because sometimes it's a matter of communicating with the people down the pipeline, like your 3D modelers, your texture artists. Sometimes it's a matter of communicating with everyone in charge of the back end of implementation, because you just need to know what's possible, even like what can be done within the constraints you've been given. Because you can come up with a really cool design, but if whoever has to work with it down the line can't physically make it possible, you've basically left everyone at square one. So in this instance, there are a series of questions that I think are fairly natural to fall into and ask yourself once you get used to the process. So like, what kinds of weapons make sense according to your setting? When you say crystallized starlight, is this a high fantasy setting? Like a wizard has done this? Is this a sci-fi setting? Like, is this something that's been refined down to fit in like a blaster? Is it space fantasy or something that crosses them together and you have to come up with a variety of range and melee weapons, like bows or guns and swords, knives, clubs, brass knuckles, whatever. Or reach weapons, which I put in there as just kind of like a nod to things like halberds, pikes, little slightly fancier looking pole arms. With regards to that setting again, what kind of geography are we looking at? Era, aesthetic, technological influence? What is available within the confines of the setting you're being asked to create for? And this is where research really gets in. What materials already exist that you can look at to create a starting point? So for this, we have crystallized starlight, so you could look at glass, you could look at natural crystalline structures, you could look at ice forms. Those all give you a starting point. And something a lot of people forget to look at, have any other artists dealt with something like this? Is there extant concept art that you can look at and see how another artist approached this problem? Because, like, if you sit down to do, a glass shield, like in the previous slide, you can look at, okay, I know lots of media has shields. How many of them have things made out of glass? And you can start looking and paring things down and compiling your reference materials. It's kind of up to you from the get-go to start asking as many questions, and often internally, about what you've been asked to create, so that you can be prepared before problems come up or gaps need filled, or your art director has an issue later. Like, you try to think of more than you are asked to create, because that way you don't have to go back and do extra later, usually. Something that comes up a lot in at least my classes, I imagine it's not uncommon in the general wider world of concept art, is how to make sure that you put your best work forward no matter what you've been asked to do. Because a lot of people won't put effort into the things that they don't like, which is unfortunate, because I think that really holds you back as an artist. For me, the key to making sure that I put my best work into whatever I'm working on is that I have to treat every assignment as if it is the utmost importance, even if it's something that is genuinely just going to be like a background element or like something most people aren't even probably going to stop and look at. As concept artists, it's our job to think about what is this going to look like from every angle? What is this going to move like? You know, what is this texture? And that is true regardless of what we've been asked to do. So you have to train yourself to put just as much thought, care, effort, and time into the tasks that you don't like as you would if you were given a task that you would prefer. One of the biggest examples that I see of this in grad school is people who insist they are going to be character concept artists. Here is a very real prompt that you could run into in grad school or working on a project. You have to design a series of mugs just as filler props to go into a Jarl's Hall. And you have to design the Jarl. A lot of people will tell themselves, well, I want to be a character designer, so I'm just going to kind of phone in the mugs. Don't do this. I cannot emphasize enough not to do this. I cannot tell you how many sordid tales I've heard of students who looked at this, looked at concept art and were like, well, I only want to do one thing, so I'm only going to learn one thing. And that makes you next to unemployable as a concept artist, because the likelihood that you will get to sit down and work on that one thing forever isn't very high. And unfortunately, I've heard stories of students who basically pigeonholed themselves this way and maybe had a job for a project, but haven't been able to get hired since. So whatever you do, do not stop and think, I don't need to learn props, environment, landscape, whatever, because I want to be a character designer. You need to learn all of it. I say, as a concept artist, you don't always, or even usually, get to pick what you're working on. You will generally be assigned a task or a series of tasks by your art director or by the art team. And it is very necessary if you want to be a successful concept artist to be capable of solving any creative challenge that you are given to a level that goes above and beyond what is called for. And it sounds absolutely useless to say, just be great at everything. But if nothing else, you need to have such a grasp of drawing and design basics that you can apply that knowledge and technical skill to any subject. So you need to be able to draw a barrel just as easily as you can draw some sick plate armor. Like, not everything that concept artists get to work on is cool or fun, which I will show you later. But just remember that you should not hold yourself back by telling yourself you're not going to put effort into things you don't like. Just continuing with that, how do you make sure you can put your best foot forward with every subject? Studies. I cannot overstate the importance of doing studies of a variety of materials, subjects, whatever. And that can be quick sketches, that could be timed studies, still life, orthographic studies, which is the view of an object from all sides, isometric studies, cutaways of tech, props that have interior workings, or even those that don't. Locations like buildings, environments, cutaways can be very useful to show basically how, say down the line, a level designer needs to be thinking about the interior of a setting. Diagrams, where applicable, not all things lead diagrams. You don't need to label the parts of a rock, but as I will show you later, I have the parts of a specific type of sword labeled because it's not common knowledge. If you can think about this an aspect of something, you should probably be drawing it. And, the constant advice that many artists will hear is, just keep a sketchbook on you at all times. That may not always be practical. But one thing you can do, most places, is take out your phone and take a reference photo and then do a study of that photo later in better circumstances. That said, getting used to working in different environments and with less than ideal materials will help you down the line. Just you'll be able to adapt if something goes sideways or if there's crunch or whatever. I have had a lot of students ask me, is there an easier way or a shortcut to getting good? And the answer is no, unfortunately. You cannot just suddenly and quickly get good. That said, you do not have to have any pre-existing artistic talent. You don't have to know a single thing about art. You don't even know which end of the you don't need to know which end of the pencil to hold, because anyone can be an artist. And skill and work and effort will outstrip talent every time, unless that talent is nurtured and also converted into skill, because talent can only take you so far. And at the end of the day, if you don't use that talent in a way that helps shape it and grow it, it's a waste. Just resting on your laurels won't improve you as an artist. But putting in that work will improve anyone as an artist. Something that I had not encountered before this semester, but that I have heard quite a few times in my classes this time around, are people saying, oh, but like I suck at drawing hands. So like, what do you do if you suck at drawing a specific thing? You draw it more. I have an example of some improvement over time. The first picture I think I drew in 2007 or 8, probably. I could not find interim drawings to show improvement for about 10 years. But 10 years later, there are some examples of drawing from live models. They were both 30-minute studies that show obvious improvement in anatomy, drawing skill, and just general, I guess, thought process is a good way to think about it. And that was up to before I started art school. And then the bottom row is all things I've done since starting art school. The drawing on the far right is actually a digital painting of a model done to emulate charcoal. But I like to think that you can see progress in understanding of proportion, anatomy, line quality, all kinds of things. But that's also, how many years has it been since like 2007, 15, something like that? I don't know what year it is. Time's not real. The point is, all you gotta do is just keep doing it. No one would look at that first drawing and think, yeah, that kid definitely gonna be a pro. No one would look at the other two drawings on top and think that. But if you look at the entire thing together as a measure of progress, you can see what happens when you put in the work. This is why you do studies. These are the work that you do. If you find yourself kind of thinking about how to do concept art as like a process, this is the approach that I use. And it's been repeated to me by multiple professors over my grad school career, but research first. I would think that seems pretty obvious, but a lot of people just jump in and they think they have to do it without any kind of help or reference. That is not true. The more research you do in the beginning, the more information you get, the more reference that you get, the faster everything else goes. You don't have to waste time down the line going back and looking for something you didn't get to start with. So doing thorough research is like the foundation of a successful concept art project. Treating thumbnails as thumbnails and not finished illustrations. What I mean by this is that, and I used to do this too, which is why I can speak to having to work through it. A lot of people will sit down and they'll be like, okay, so I need to do 10 thumbnails by next week. So they'll sit down and they'll spend like an hour at a time on each thumbnail. And they'll basically come up with little finished illustrations to turn in that are way more than they need to be. Thumbnails are meant to be small, quick measures of your ideas. You're meant to, if you're working on one and you have an idea based on what you've just done, move on to the next and form that idea. Just keep working. In most of my classes, we aren't being asked to do a lot of thumbnails because apparently lots of students complained and were like, oh, 20 thumbnails is too much. But that also a lot of times came from a place of people putting in too much effort on your thumbnails, which isn't a good use of your time. That said, no matter what number you're given, just keep iterating on your ideas until you've explored every possible avenue that you can possibly come up with. If your art director says, I want 50 thumbnails, try to do 100. Have extra. You can choose your top ones and submit them, and, you can hold on to the others in case there's nothing that the art director really likes or latches onto, or if they want to see iterations of a particular design. Like, never throw away your work, and I recommend always doing a little bit extra just because that over preparation can help you be successful on a project. One of the things that I have learned through school and through working with the Morrowind team is that offering your art director options will make everyone's job easier. So, like, if you're designing a prop, offer choices for, like, separate parts that they can assemble. So, like, mugs we talked about earlier. Have different silhouettes and different shapes. Have them in different sizes. Have different handles. Have them made out of different materials. Have different textures or patterns. Even colors, if that is something that you've been asked to provide. Offer as much variety as possible, so your art director can be like, I want mug A with handle D with design F. And then you just take those parts that you've prepared and you assemble them. And you produce the finished concept based on what your art director has told you. I started doing that as just a means of over preparation because I wasn't 100% sure what I was doing. And then I've continued doing that, and I had a professor this semester who is a professional concept artist and who has worked on, like, big name series and stuff that I don't know if I can say, so I'm just gonna assure you that he is like a big name concept artist. Said that offering the different options is like an art director's dream. It is not that much more work for us as concept artists to come up with those options. So if that can make everything easier for the rest of the team, and if that can, streamline things, why would you not do it? Um, the spend your time wisely, obviously, kind of harkening back to like, don't spend an hour on a thumbnail. Don't get lost in a sauce because you just decided you're going to do this really detailed, like, engraving on something. That part comes later. The most important part of being, I think, any kind of artist, but a concept artist especially, is that you need to be able to accept critique. I know there are a lot of people who just they put themselves into what they've created. They cannot detach themselves from it and look at it objectively. And any legitimate technical critique is perceived as a personal attack. I know that that happened because that's how I was when I was a kid. But as you work to improve and as you want to improve, you realize that actual useful critique is meant to help you get better. It's someone sees the potential, that advice is meant to help you fulfill it. It is beyond necessary to be able to thoughtfully, gracefully, and happily accept critique of your work, not just from your supervisor or from someone above you, but from your peers, from your equals. And a lot of people struggle with that. Apparently, even at the level of grad school, there are still people who will get salty or defensive over critiques, and some who will even tell, a professor who's been doing it for decades, you don't know what you're talking about, or you don't understand me. I want critique, personally. Like, please, tear my work apart and tell me how to improve it. Because if I don't get critique, I can't improve. Like, every once in a while, getting it right in the first try, great. That just made everything easier for everyone. But that's not realistic to expect every time. So it's just good to be able to accept criticism of your work. Conversely, you have to learn how to offer useful critique and not personal opinions. Like, there's a stark difference between, I don't like this color, and maybe using a more muted tone of this color will allow you to use a more saturated version of this one. And something like that is useful. It can be applied, it can be changed, but I don't like, or I don't think that XYZ isn't useful critique. Useful critique is grounded in artistic principles, design principles. It's grounded in applicability to the overall project and helping make sure that a design best matches the project as possible. So, critique is your friend, but also learn how to critique properly. So to be successful as a concept artist, you need to understand that, like, your personal artistic process for the way you would create work for yourself may not be what is going to be best for work as a concept artist, and that you may need to adapt your approach to art. If I'm going to sit down and I'm going to work on something for myself, I'm probably going to just noodle around with a pose layer after layer after layer, and that may mean I have 20 sketch layers before I have something that I actually want to do. You don't get to do that so much in the professional world, so that needs to be basically your thumbnailing stage, and it needs to be fast. The importance of having a project-minded approach to completing these projects is very difficult for some people because they've only ever created art for themselves. So creating art for someone else is a new experience that is very different, and people often need to rethink how they draw. It is really necessary to kind of follow that same approach every time, just to have a routine and a system. But do remember that concept art is not the overall focus of a project. A lot of times concept art doesn't even get seen by anyone other than who's immediately down the pipeline. So, like, how many... Unless you go buy, like, one of those art books that has, like, all of the background information for stuff, you're not going to see a lot of concept art. It doesn't need to be, like, marketing illustration quality. It needs to be communicative of the ideas that will help make the development of your concept possible. Even though it does not have to be quality every time, you should still be putting forward your best quality, even if, like, only your art director or only a modeler is going to see it, because you will perform the way you practice. So if you only put a little bit of effort into art that's not going to be seen by very many people, you won't put as much effort as you could into art that will be seen and that will matter. And that's just part of developing a consistent process that will help you be successful. Communication is extremely important with the game development pipeline, and it's true for other media as well. I'm just studying game development, so that's what you get. You as a concept artist need to be in communication with the 3D modeler, the texture artists, animators, special effects artist, whoever has to deal with your work down the line. You need to be in communication with, because you need to know, are there constraints, restrictions, is this particular function of an item even viable to, like, animation options? Like, you don't necessarily need to be able to do every single job down the pipeline, but you need to be able to talk to everybody down the pipeline in a way that will help you develop art that serves the team. Because the purpose of concept art is to tell the people who have to create these things what to create in as much detail as possible. Because a modeler doesn't have time to be doing that you skimp out on. You need to provide everything. Because if you don't, people down the line have to wait time. Having worked on some prototype games in grad school, I can say that programs like Asana and Trello are really helpful. And having actual regular meetings, in person, Zoom, Discord, whatever, that is absolutely necessary to make sure everyone's on the same page. And everyone needs to be there. I had a mate for a prototype game that I was building that we had 6 weeks to develop a fully functional game, and he just didn't feel like he needed to come for most of the meetings. And then he would not only do his tasks poorly, he would do the wrong tasks. And that is even with having a Trello he can refer to and having an overarching style guide and design document. So being actively part of the team is necessary to make sure that everything goes smoothly, everything turns out right, and everyone's on the same page. You stay a functional team. This is an example of something that I did for Morrowind with a very good prompt. It doesn't necessarily get into the like in-depth anatomy of a deustag, but it tells you, you know, this is where it lives, this is how it moves, this is the size, its diet, and then details about it that are relevant to mechanical things. So, like, it's renowned for its venison. It needs to be meaty. So, the first design that I did is the one with the legs sticking back. This was really liked, but it wasn't practical for our purposes because this creature needed to be adapted to fit a pre-existing model and animation skeleton. Talking with several other team members, I figured out how to convert the legs so that it would fit the Ashhopper skeleton, and went with these diagrams and these images to help me design in a way that the rest of the team could use. This was a very good project with great information, good guides, great feedback. Everything went really smoothly. The prompt for this was, we need some statues of Azura. That's all I got. So I did some very rough pose thumbnails, some rough seated and standing poses, and some different plinths. And let the art director choose from the various poses what she wanted to go with. I did a very quick study of the face so that I could get kind of a consistent style that was easy to read. And then I took the pose that the art director went with, and I iterated on it materially. You don't need to be able to see every single little thumbnail's details in here. Basically, I just played around with what parts got gold and which parts didn't. The choice that the art director ultimately made had gold on the held props and then gold on the plinth, but not on the rest of the statue. Maybe on the eyes. I think on the eyes. Prior to doing my own finished illustrations, I went into a 3D program and I put together a reference so that I could make sure I had some anatomical accuracy. You do not have to be a 3D modeler. You do not have to know how to do everything. It helps to be able to use 3D tools because that can make your job as a 2D artist much easier. I did not model this form personally. I went into Daz Studio, picked a generic body, and then posed it, exported the pose to Mudbox, slapped some texture on it, and went from there. And that's how I was able to work toward the finished statue drawings that I have here at the bottom that shows front, side, and back. It would have also shown the other side, top, and bottom, but the 3D modeler was faster than me. So you have my concept on the left, and you have the finished statue on the right. If you would like to support the 3D artist, you can go to the first link here to visit the page and see the finished asset like fully. And if you just want to support the artist, you can follow the second link to their art station and go ahead and follow them. But yeah, the artist worked so fast to develop this asset that I didn't even have time to do the other side view. So that was a little jarring. Ideally, you should still go back and you should do that finished portion, even just for the sake of your portfolio. I have a lot of work to do for school, so I have not done that. But you can see what happens when a piece of concept art works the way it's supposed to. This is the ideal, going from your finished design to an implemented asset. And that's a really great feeling, just for anyone who's never gotten to see that. Like, I probably stared at these 3D models for like an hour because I'd never seen something I created turned into an actual thing, and it was just the coolest. This is the most recent project that I completed for Morrowind. You may have seen this before. I might have had this in my creature design lecture. I needed to do sea sponges. I think these were these were Arctic sea sponges. So I did a lot of research on sea sponge types, and they're surprisingly interesting. You would think it would be very boring, but actually, sea sponges are kind of cool. And then I started combining them with other plants. So, like, the third thumbnail here, I combined just a generic sponge species with a Euphorbia cristata, which is a type of grafted cactus, and with a Myrtillicactus geometrizans cristata, which is a blue-crested cactus. And that's the design I came up with, combining them. And you can see kind of along the process of things, I put notes about what I used as reference. I did not include the reference because that's not the part. And then I offered color options. The more gradiated options on the bottom, I only did the top half because I lost the other half of every single one of those files. So that was a little weird. But these are obviously pretty highly rendered. Your concept art does not need to be this highly rendered, especially when you first start. These did each start with a silhouette that I then worked around, but basically everything that I said was a good work process to do, I didn't do. I got hyper fixated on sea sponges, so I just sat down and married these. It is not how I recommend working. If you want to produce concepts to this level, like with this much effort and this much rendering, feel free. But try to stay in communication with somebody so that you don't put all your eggs in one basket and find that you've spent 15 hours on something that isn't viable for use. But yeah, there wasn't really anything other than we need Arctic sponges for this one. So it was up to me to do a lot of research on sea life in Arctic environments and to come up with variations based on things that felt like they fit in world and things that were grounded in some sense of reality, things that harkened back to real world examples. I'm gonna blitz through my thesis stuff because it's not that important overall. This is one of the examples that I'm talking about when I say give your art director options. I turned in this selection of blades, guards, grips, and pommels, and my professor picked them and was just like, okay, use these elements, put a blade together. And that is what I did. The diagrams over here are because most people won't look at a rapier and think, yes, I know how to pick that up and hold it, or know what the parts are. So I tried to provide that for some context to make what can be seen on the first page make sense. And ultimately, I was able to put together the blade here in the center. I provided it being held by the character it's intended for with a means of checking the scale. And this is the finished sheet, which includes the texture indications and the uncolored thumbnails, the colored thumbnails, the diagrams, and the finished asset. So that's pretty straightforward. Everything that went into this prop compiled. This is a very broad look, and there are some things that are duplicated here because that was just the fastest way to put them together. Starting with the upper left, the drawing in the upper left is the very first drawing I ever did on this character, who is the protagonist of my thesis. The lower middle is the sheet for heads, hair, and body types that I did like 2 weeks ago, I think. So you can see all of the design evolutions that she's gone through. I even tried some 3D stuff. It's not the direction I'm gonna go, but I'm glad I tried it. And then the lower right drawing is a variety of court swords that I did to try to get some feedback to move forward with the design for her weapon. This is a very broad and overarching look at the evolution of the main character and the supporting characters. You can see places where I've received feedback. So like the middle right image here, my 2 drawings that I submitted, and then these are recommendations and drawovers done by a professor to help better the anatomy, make the poses look more natural, whatever. And here you can see the progress from my original drawing, my professor's feedback, my adaptation, and then a final adaptation based on somebody else's feedback as well that wanted to give him more princely hair. This is an example where I have a bunch of studies here on the left. This is one of the prototype games we made, which is actually based on a furry little sidekick from my thesis. These studies helped me come up with this beetle enemy, which is substantial in size and will mess up poor little Mittens if he hits it. I'm not going to read the game pitch and everything to you. It's a platformer. You play as a cute little baby Enfield trying to get back to his mom. Unrelated to that game, but still very necessary for my thesis, is this big snaky boy up here. He is the overall villain, and he needs to be absolutely massive. And he also needs to be really colorful and bright, because he has a lot of baggage that I'm not going to go into for y'all, but basically he needs to be very shiny. This is some of the stuff that I used when I presented my midpoint review. Color scripts that kind of show the tone through different parts of the story. Work on a dramatic scene, the scene that immediately follows, the beatboard kind of break down into 5 cinematic moments with thumbnails for other possible, like, storyboards, basically. The initial prop designs that I did for a couple of maps, a pillar, and an amulet, and some wood stuff. The environment concepts have all been done through a lot of iteration and thumbnail work and color testing and isometric stuff, going back and doing other stuff, whatever. This illustration of the temple in the jungle, I did probably 2020, probably spring 2020, and then I just keep going back every once in a while and building on it, because as I improve, I want to go back and improve this piece of my work, because I think it will be a useful insert for my thesis. In conclusion, basically make sure you are thoughtful with your approach to ideation and iteration. So be thoughtful with how you approach your creation, and how you alter your design as you go through the initial stages. Obviously, this means using research to help you kind of figure out all of the possibilities, like I did with the court sword a few pages ago. As a concept artist, you've got to communicate with your team, because you are not the end-all be-all. You are like step one on a pipeline that goes very big. You do need to consider details that others might miss, especially if you want to be concept artist for games, especially if you're going to be working on things that you can interact with. You need to think about, what does the inside of this crate look like? What is going to be inside this dresser drawer? Stuff like that. Do research and use reference. This is not cheating. I don't know where people get this idea. Literally using reference photos and doing research is just being smart as an artist. It does not taint the creative process or lessen your creativity or whatever some people seem to think. You should be drawing from reference. And in fact, clients, as a professional, do not care how the work gets done as long as it gets done to the level they expect. So if you're doing a digital painting, don't waste time on the drawing. Do a quick trace of your reference photos, iterate on them until you have the exact thing you need, and then paint. But make sure that drawing stage goes very fast. The effort needs to go into the painting. Again, this is not cheating. This is just literally being intelligent. Please research. Please use reference. And above all else, practice drawing the things that you are bad at. Like, even things you're not interested in or things you outright don't like. Like, I hate insects, and I'm a pretty severe arachnophobe. But I do those studies because I know that as a creature designer, that will only bolster my skills. And practicing the things you're bad at will give you the best chance of being successful as a concept artist, because the more you practice them, the fewer things you will be bad at. That's what I got. So I guess if anybody has any questions, let me know.
I actually have 4 questions.
My God, you numbered them. I love it. What's up?
Okay, the first one is quite long, but just stay with me. How much time should you use to think about the backstory, mesh, details, etc. when making the first draft of a concept? Should you present few drastic options so everyone would pick their favorite features and you work from there, or pick few good ideas that you think would do best?
So there is no specific set amount of time that you should spend in that phase thinking about what you're going to create, because that will largely depend on the constraints of what you're working on. So, like, if you're working on a, like, medieval European style game, you're not going to sit and waste time developing, like, blasters. Generally, that kind of process is very process of elimination and figuring out what doesn't fit so that you can figure out what does. Most projects will have what is called a game design document, which will list a lot of the, I guess, constraints, limits, and lacks thereof for a project. And everything should have what's called a style guide, which shows you how you should be drawing something, because you should be able to work in multiple different styles if possible. If you do not have to come up with the backstory, you have to create something from someone else's backstory. Keep that in mind. Don't forget it. Work with it in mind, but don't try to add on to it. If you have to come up with something, then part of how long you take coming up with that idea is based on your deadline. So, like, I submitted my first draft of my thesis concept in spring 2022, or spring 2020, rather, sorry. And I've been developing it and changing it and altering it since then. And I have basically until next May to iron it all out and present it. So I'm to the stage where I shouldn't be changing a whole lot more, but if I absolutely have to make something fit, I can. But you need to make sure that you lock everything down with enough time for you to work and develop at your speed, knowing your deadline.
Okay, so what is a good balance between quality and quantity then? For example, if you have, well, 2 years, for example, do you choose to work a lot of projects and a lot of ideas and then just deleting them, or just choosing the quality over quantity?
When you are first starting off, unless you have very, very specific instructions to do otherwise, I recommend going with quantity, because that way whoever needs to help you narrow it down has more to choose from and can get a more comprehensive idea what they're looking for. In my case, you'll probably have noticed that the thing I've done the most iterations on for my thesis is character designs. Because my thesis is a character-driven project, the characters are what needs to be the best. But that said, I do still need to provide environments, props, etc. So do the most work on the thing that matters most, which may be kind of fuzzy, may not be very well defined. But if you do a lot of loose work in the beginning, that will allow you to start tightening things up and providing the quality sooner in the project. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Thank you.